Now we're moving into Chapter 2, Tables and Graphs. When we last left off, we were talking about how to collect data through good principles of experimental design, and after reviewing what we want to study, how we should view the things we want to study. So if we think about it in terms of a pipeline, right, we're still talking about statistical studies. So we have a question that guides us, right? That leads us to our objects of study. So remember, we were looking at a population. That we're interested in, and we draw samples from them using our sampling methods. And we have some experimental design principles where we decide what variables to study. So our explanatory variable, how does it affect the response variable, and what confounding variables might be present. And we have ways to minimize the effects of the confounding variables to see a clear relationship between the explanatory variable and the response variable. But once we have all that, right, ultimately what we have is data. Whether it's quantitative or categorical, at whatever level of measurement we're collecting it, we're going to develop some appropriate ways to organize. So that's tables. And display using graphs. We will have a couple of different techniques depending on what kind of data we're talking about, right? So we have these two objectives in this chapter, and we're going to be working with categorical data. So we'll figure out ways to organize and display categorical data, quantitative data, and most importantly, bivariate data and multivariate data. So that'll be kind of a prelude or preview to something that we'll talk about much later on. But let's discuss real quick then what our objectives for this chapter are. So our objectives, we're going to identify and apply appropriate tables for organizing data. And that we'll split that into categorical and quantitative. And similarly, identify and apply appropriate graphs for displaying those data. So we'll discuss, when to use the tables, what tables, or when to use the graphs, what graphs are appropriate for use in certain contexts but not in others, when to not use a certain kind of graph ever. And lastly, we're going to, in terms of bivariate data, we're going to identify and interpret linear correlation trends, which is the simplest relationship between two variables. So between our explanatory variable and our response variable, the most simple kind of relationship we could see is linear correlation.